video, I'm going to be going over some information that I stumbled upon when I recently visited a thrift store in town. Okay, so there's a couple of different manuals here by one particular author, and one of the first things that I look at when I look at one of these preparedness manuals or guides or videos regarding urban survival is when it was made and whether or not they're motivated by politics. This particular author steers away from some of the more controversial stuff and pretty much delivers a no-nonsense, pretty easy to understand, using simple language and not getting too complex and getting straight to the heart of the matter. So I'm not going to be able to get into all this material. And there's multiple booklets here. I probably picked this up for about $4. It was probably, when it was new, you know, some of these things go for $40 and $100. It also came with, well, this is actually at the thrift store, not by the same content creator. This is How to Grow Anything, Food, Gardening for Everyone. So part of my preparation is gathering information, even though there are certain things that I'm not doing regarding homesteading yet. It's about taking steps and gathering knowledge. And there's a lot of knowledge in this particular field. I started interviewing people on my YouTube channel and on Access TV, on Outside the Box, about a decade ago. Various authors, including Richard from survivalcenter.com, helped him open up a survival store. And I've talked to other individuals, Matthew Stein, who's the author of When Disaster Strikes, Cody Lundeen, I believe, who is the author of When All Hell Breaks Loose. And so the beauty of having access to this information, whether it be podcasts, whether it be videos, whether it be books, bought new or used, is that you have a lot of different information, and it's important to keep it in context that you're getting information from their particular perspective and their experience. And in some cases, you deal with ego. Somebody may say, well, you can't do that, or solar panels won't do you any good in that part of the country, because they may be, even if they think they're a survivalist, they may be full-time on the grid, not off the grid. So there's various schools of information that are relevant, from off-grid living to urban survival. And a lot of things that are actually discussed in this particular manual, I think, are applicable everywhere. There are certain things that I'm going to get into later, like the other manuals, because this is very much in depth. Just a little bit of a preview, because I think I'll be doing an ongoing series, and I'll have a playlist created on the YouTube homepage. Top 10 items sold out after a crisis. This mostly focuses, and I'll just mention that briefly, on things like water, dried fruits and vegetables, grains and cereals, pastas and sauces, canned meats and fish, nuts and seeds, juices and powdered milk, oils and seasonings, comfort foods, and non-food items. Somebody else would have their own list. There's a reason why a lot of websites have been doing fairly well in recent years, discussing off-grid living and homesteading. The groups are growing and growing and growing. And it's not just about disaster preparedness. For a lot of people, it's just getting back down to nature, getting closer to nature, something that a lot of people in my generation, have not been exposed to a great deal of. And in addition, we have concerns about the economy and a lot of people's standard of living. And ultimately, it comes down to being able to feed your family. So how to cut your grocery bills in half, the water survival guide, the survival garden guide, and where we will begin, survive urban chaos. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try to keep some of my commentary on this brief and stick with the author's information. But this is really well written and gets right to the point. So when we come back, we will go over the introduction and the 3 essentials, the benefits of urban survival. We're going to skip the 72-hour grab-and-go pack, come back and do a special on that, and other things that you may need, including foods. But we're going to skip today to the philosophy of situational awareness, self-defense, dealing with mobs, and so much more. If you're new, subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter at alexansary.tv. Now, there's a lot of good information out there. There's also questionable information. I remember interviewing the author of an online ebook in the late 2000s, How to Survive Martial Law, and I felt that very little information was actually given out on the air, except the promotion of extreme fear. And so a lot of information that some people put out and market to a specific audience is recycled and rehashed. This, which is very well written, was published in 2015. So we're going to go through the introduction. We'll come back and get into the 72-hour kit and other items and start talking about situational awareness. And I have a few stories to share with you as well. So, beginning, hello and welcome to Survive Urban Chaos. This could literally be the most important book that you could ever read in your life. It can make the difference between you surviving a forthcoming apocalypse and being able to rebuild your life, or falling at the first hurdle and your genes being weeded out of existence. This book is best read from front to back and then referred to as necessary. Broadly speaking, there are three main areas. The first is about planning ahead. This means examining your situation and tailoring your plans accordingly. Where might you and your loved ones be when you are forced straight into survival mode? And can you cope? This also involves the classic survival planning of preparing an emergency kit and food and equipment reserves ahead of time. The second is about knowledge. Although the greatest skill is knowing how to adapt to fit a situation as it changes. Having as much survival knowledge as possible will help you prepare for all the different scenarios. Do you know what will be valuable in an apocalyptic scenario? And do you know how to barter? How can you evade angry mobs in your city? These are just some of the things that you need to know how to do before actually putting them into practice. Then, there are a few other important pieces of the puzzle, such as skills to start training right now, and how to keep your mind and body fit. Long-term urban survival and examination of country case studies to see what we can learn from those who already had to go through this. Remember, most people think that urban survival is about keeping 6 months worth of rice in their home, and that's all they have to worry about. This could not be further from the truth and shows a lack of true preparation. This book will show you how to become a true survivor, capable of outliving many of your fellow citizens. Kind of a dramatic opening there. I'm going to have to come back and add some of my own personal commentary later, because I want to get through some of his key points. And again, I'm summarizing. So in the next section, entitled Essentials, the 3 essentials of urban survival are not what you may think. The unprepared may believe it's something like a gun, water, and rice. But this could not be further from the truth. Here are 3 real essentials of urban survival. First, a kit. Kit is just another word for equipment. It's what you have with you and what you have access to, stored at locations. Having the right kit goes a long way towards providing you with what you need to feed and defend yourself. If a major disaster occurs and you have not prepared any kit beforehand, then all you will have to do, or all you have, then is the clothes on your back and the cash in your wallet. Depending on the event, your car may no longer start and your ATM cards may no longer function. The electricity may even be out and you can struggle to keep yourself warm. Having the right kit is all about adequate preparation beforehand. Sure, you can never prepare for absolutely every possible scenario perfectly, but you can prepare a kit that will adequately cover the most likely events for your own situation. Knowledge. The knowledge that you possess now is geared towards the world that you live in. So what happens if the world suddenly turns upside down? Most people would be ill prepared. They will have no idea how to survive in a scenario where access to water is limited, electricity is not available, shelves of food are empty, and mobs run amok. When a soldier reaches the battlefield for the first time, he knows what to do. This is because he has been drilled through several weeks of basic training. To survive in an urban survival situation, you must drill with the knowledge that you are going to need. I remember those meetups in Portland, Oregon at the end of 2007, where we were doing hiking and basic survival skills at Forest Park and places like that. The will to live. Many survivalists forget about this third essential step. In many ways, it is the most essential. A man can't survive without a kit and knowledge if he has the will to live and quickly adapts. But without the will to live, his kit and his knowledge won't be enough to help him survive some sticky situations. I knew someone once who was a fanatical survivalist who committed suicide several years ago. The human mind is the most powerful tool that you have at your disposal, but in a survival situation it is quickly tested to its limits. You may think that you will be strong when it matters most, but we are all unpredictable and anyone can panic. This book includes information on how to keep your spirits up and your morale high. Many survivalists in history have gone through low periods and wonder if their efforts were worth it and if suicide might be a better option. Not only can you learn how to prevent this, but you will also see that having a strong will to live will enable you to stay one step ahead of your fellow citizens who ultimately are competitors in survival. 5 basic needs. Kit, knowledge, and the will to live are the 3 most important elements of urban survival. Looking at the most tangible necessities, you will have 5 basic needs in a survival situation. These are the things that you need to be thinking about right now, even before you read the rest of this book. The first suggestion is food. The body needs food to power it. In basic terms, you need a specific amount of calories per day. Without getting food, your body will get energy from your fat reserves. It's not just the energy content that matters, but the nutritional content. In the immediate 72 hours after a disaster, this won't matter too much. But any longer than that, and you need to make sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need. Otherwise, you will quickly find yourself experiencing all kinds of health problems. Storing food ahead of time is obviously essential. You will need to have a variety of different types of foods, from canned that are ready to eat immediately to dried foods that require some minimal preparation. And I skimmed through this briefly. He's not a big fan of MREs due to the cost and the lack of nutritional quality. So, MREs is something that people have leaned on when it comes to survival foods, and I'll come back to that. It's also about knowing what your own personal body's nutritional needs and requirements happen to be. Number 2, water. Well, your body can easily survive without food for even a number of weeks. It will quickly die without a few days if you don't get water. You may have easy access to water right now, but what happens if the water supply gets shut off or someone upstream cuts off a nearby river? More likely what happens if your water source becomes contaminated and undrinkable. One thing about, collecting water, runoff water from a hill, living off the grid, is making sure that it's not connecting with the main road, in which the chemicals the county lays on the dirt roads so they don't fall apart, that can contaminate the water supply. Number 3, shelter. Without shelter, you can die from exposure to the elements. Shelter provides some measure of defense as well as concealment from potentially dangerous threats such as violent mobs and even radioactive fallout. You can survive without shelter, but you need much luck on your side, such as optimum environmental conditions, the right type of disaster. Basically, you need a lot of luck, so why take chances? Number 4, security. Shelter provides some basic levels of security, but you need more than that. The biggest threat to your security comes from other survivors looking to take what you have. What's not mentioned right out of the gate is one of the most greatest concerns I have regarding urban survival for the men that are out there and the women. It's a pretty corrupted society. Human trafficking isn't going away. People need to have the means to defend their women or to not be in dangerous areas to where they're more likely to come under attack, because that's one of the things to be looted in a worst case scenario depended on the disaster. If it's a geopolitical fallout or something like that, then I would say yes, that's probably one of the greater risks, along with having physical items looted from the household, unfortunately. You need to protect yourself from danger. Legal firearms are the best way to provide security for you and your family, but they are not the only way. There are also a variety of other weapons you can use for defensive measures. There's also like a buckshot or a different type of a firearm that's not illegal, from what I understand, for felons. It's an old school type of firearm. I have no familiarity with it, but That's some other information that I've come across. Crossbows, other things. Now, there's a variety of other weapons you can use for defensive measures. And there's a number of other strategies that you can employ that will make you less of a target and enable you to avoid threats in the first place. Remember, it is nearly always better to evade a threat rather than take it on directly. And number 4, medical. If you need regular medication to support your health, then you will obviously need to stock up beforehand before pharmacies are likely to be too heavily inundated in the event of a disaster. And I know from the toothache issue, and I'll be seeing the dentist soon, having things that can deal with pain relief, clove oil, coconut oil, apple cider vinegar, garlic, other herbs and natural things that you can use in a disaster that you can apply for a medical purpose if you don't have access to a doctor. There's also a couple best-selling books, When There Is No Doctor and When There Is No Dentist, and there are manuals and books out there on home birth. Pharmacies are often targets for looters looking to sell off medication to the needy and make a profit. Even if you don't require medication, you will need some basics in the event of a disaster and having to be holed up for a while. Basic essentials, anesthesics, pain relievers, anti-inflammatory drugs, and a good selection of antibiotics are necessary. I won't disagree with that. Remember, it is unlikely that the basic health infrastructure as you know it will be in full operation in the event of urban chaos. And you may have to self-diagnose, prescribe, and generally be your own doctor to yourself and your family. Now that you know the basics of what needs to be considered for urban survival, before we go straight into the preparation and what you need to know, let's take a quick look at the actual benefits of urban survival over traditional survival. So the next section is benefits of urban survival. My off-grid coffee here. I guess one of the terms is cowboy coffee, where it's just the grinds and the coffee together without going through the actual process. Before we discuss the benefits of urban survival, let us first clarify exactly what is meant by urban survival. Definition: it is a situation where you are forced to remain and survive in an urban environment, towns, cities, and metro areas. I talked about top off for it when I was in Portland, and part of the drill was keeping people in the event of a dirty radioactive release of something, while they're also doing war game drills up in aerospace. So we've seen creepy drills on the part of our own government, where it seems that there's a fair amount of practicing and training for quarantining and executive orders. We look at the aftermath of the swine flu scare from Barack Obama and what was signed approximately in October 2009, right when it all went quiet, giving the government even more power to deal with threats. So that's something you consider for people that look towards the government to save us. What if what we're trying to survive is something that's actually been manufactured? And we'll come back to that in other videos. Many survivalists who live outside cities talk down urban survival and say they would never want to be in urban areas in a disaster. It sounds like somebody we know. They point to violent mobs who would want to take from you as a classic reason to stay away from such areas. I personally see this posturing and trying to simply reinforce their own forced survival situations by talking down another. Then there's escaping homelessness and not being able to afford in certain areas. So those are reasons why certain urban areas are not ideal for living in, when resources are going into living and renting a box they're never actually going to own. So that's something to consider as well. Ultimately, nobody has access to heavily stocked, heavily defended bunker with a bunker with supplies to last for years. Everyone, no matter where you are, must make the most of their present situation while accepting that there are limitations to every survival plan. Yes, there are. That said, there are many great benefits to urban survival. So, we go now into benefits of urban survival. In the event of a disaster/apocalypse, employment won't necessarily stop. If you need to earn money, then urban areas are going to have the greatest liquidity, even if you're paid by barter, for example. Urban areas have also better access to emergency services, such as the fire department, paramedics, doctors, hospitals, etc. Even though they may be compromised in the event of a disaster, being at least partially operational is better than the likely non-existence of these services in rural areas. In the immediate aftermath of a disaster, the electricity may go out, the water supply may be cut off, and food may quickly disappear as the shipping supply dries up. Things will be tough for a while, but with adequate preparation, you will be okay. When all these things start to come back online, it is urban areas that will benefit first. Urban areas will get their lights back on first, their drugs available first, and their water switched on first. Although crime will become epidemic in heavily populated areas, you should also consider the types of crimes committed. If you make yourself visible or stick in groups, you can reduce your chances of becoming a victim of crime and even avoid some of the worst crimes. Any criminal who tries to take you on knows that he must be quick. He would rather avoid a confrontation against a group. On the other hand, if you're in a rural area, then a criminal can take his time to commit his crime and may not be seen by anyone. During the Argentine financial crisis from 1999 to 2002, people in rural areas were tortured for days by criminals who can run amok with little chance of discovery. If you have a garden, you can even grow your own food and small livestock such as fish, rabbits, and even snails in an urban environment. Sure, you won't be able to feed hundreds of people, but you would be amazed at what you can yield from a tiny plot of land. It is even possible to hunt in an urban environment. Squirrels, rabbits, pigeons, and even foxes are all fair game in an urban survival situation. That's especially true with some of the parks in Portland where people feed the ducks and the pigeons are abundant, at places like Laurelhurst in Southeast, which is a pretty nice neighborhood, now overrun by homelessness. People living out their urban survival experience. See, and that's a particular element that I'll continue to get into as well that isn't mentioned so much here, is the ongoing crises and collapses on individual levels, not so much the nation state, but individuals within a society that is not doing as well economically as some people would rather like to believe, despite where the stock market is going. If push comes to shove, you can even kill cats and dogs. Remember, there are almost as many dogs and cats combined as there are people in most developed countries. Tilapia fish is something that some people try to farm off the grid. And perhaps, I'm sure, yes, in the grid, of course. More access to lights and water. But if you need food and you're going to starve, and if you don't eat soon and your city is descending into lawlessness, then what does it matter if you scavenge canned food from an uninhabited, long since abandoned house? Though most people seem to think that cities will be the first places to descend into violent carnage, urban areas actually enjoy the longest rule of law. Think about where law enforcement is deployed and where their employees live. In rural areas, the single sheriff and his deputies are going to struggle to keep the rule of law if enough people rebel. In urban areas, law enforcement has more resources and can react more quickly to ongoing events. And there's an up and a down to that. What if the government's gone rogue? Then those urban areas would be more under control. Or what if those urban areas come under attack from a foreign government or threat that have breached the nation's defenses and have actually entered with their standing armies to the tune of millions? We know where we're going with this. If you haven't checked out my video, Fourth Horse Rising, for those of you that are new viewers, definitely want to subscribe and check that out over at alexansary.tv or on YouTube. It's a video mashup compiling these clips. For years and years, we've seen the preparations for a global conflict. And so in situations like this, urban areas would be facing additional threats, even domestic threats, as people do things as they reach bottom-out levels of desperation. So that's what I have to add into this, as we're hearing also this great information in another perspective. Now, this is something that I've been mentioning repeatedly. There's also the assumption that people will try to move out of cities in the event of a disaster and that all major transport routes will be clogged for days. Historical evidence does not always support this theory. Sometimes those in rural areas who are the last recipients of government aid will move closer to urban areas and try to survive. Sometimes people move from one city to another safe one and will not look to relocate to rural areas. These migration patterns are difficult to predict, but this just serves to demonstrate that it's not always as simple as head for the hills. The reality is much different. And so people need to be prepared to be in a shelter-in situation. And that's where having, and we'll get into that later, food, water, particular supplies, to not need to go outside into dangerous situations where there are groups looting. Can you imagine the environment on the streets if there was hyperinflation to where bread, for example, was up to a certain amount? The urban survivalist would have means of baking their own bread right there in their own studio apartment. There's actually ways you can bake bread with a propane cooker, a Coleman propane stove, and so you can get those online or at your local big box store. But there are easy ways in which people can bake bread, and even ways that they can cook using heating fuel that is indoor safe. Okay, so the next situation. So the next situation is situational planning. All survival preparations need to be geared towards your current situation and your aims. Is it just you? Do you have family to look after? Most of us do. Are any of them disabled? Do you work far from home? Survival is about adaptation, and this also applies to your preparation. You must formulate your plans by taking into account many important factors. Let's take a closer look at what you need to consider. Your current base. The first thing that you need to consider is your main base. If a disaster were to strike tomorrow, you would have to make do with what you have now. So you definitely need to make plans for this, even if your present location is far from ideal. Know the main routes in and out of your current city or town. Where is the quickest way to high ground? Where are the nearest rivers located? Where are the poorest high crime neighborhoods? Where is the nearest major city if you had to relocate suddenly? If your present situation is not ideal, for example, water pumped into your city, big gang presence, or no water being pumped in, then you should consider moving elsewhere in the medium to long term, somewhere better suited to survival if a disaster occurs. Building a team. Do not think that you can go it alone as some kind of lone wolf in the event of a major disaster. Becoming a hermit and trying to remain hidden until the worst passes may not be the best strategy in the event of a disaster. You're in a much better place if you can build a team of like-minded people ahead of time. So we've had years and years of people to do the right things and with their resources. And I think that we've seen this stage-managed Civil War scenario without firearms per se. They're not shooting each other in the street. They're fighting for the most part, although sometimes people get hit with a moving vehicle. But these are things, these are warning signs. And these things weren't necessarily happening when this person wrote this 3 years ago. So things like that can complicate, again, the urban living environment. Do not go out and advertise for allies in the event of a disaster. This will simply be letting people know that you are prepared and they can leech off you when it all goes down. Get to know your neighbors. When you move into an area, go knocking and make yourself known. Participate in any community events. Say hello when you see people around and make some small talk. You have to use discernment with that. You don't go knocking on the door of a meth house. You don't go knocking on the door of people that don't want to be bothered. So you have to use discernment with that. Over time, you will gradually get a good idea for who is switched on. This is important. It would be very useful, those that would be very useful allies in the event of a disaster. Bring up the topic of preparedness sometimes and see how they react. If you like their reaction, ask them if they would be willing to back you up if anything happened, if you were to promise to back them up in return. So there are also people that live off the grid that don't like anyone that's warning about future events. That's repelling to them. And so it's difficult to work with off-gridders that aren't concerned about the reality ending up a certain way to the need where we need to be prepared and develop those close-knit communities. So just because you go off grid, like the author's saying, you know, it's not all it's cracked up to be when you head for the hills. There are complications and specific challenges that an individual is going to face when they go off grid. Just because you get away from city people where they're staring at their smartphones doesn't mean that there aren't off-gridders that are staring at Facebook all day using satellite technology, or watching Netflix, or playing Call of Duty using power from the sun all day long, and then the generator to play Call of Duty all night long. And we're just talking just in general. So what I've come to learn is, you know, there's, with technology and a lot of media addiction, the mentality is still pretty similar with regards to certain things, and people are very much affected by the politics, the news, what's on the wire. But if we were to go back in time 20 years, 30 years ago, there'd be more of a diverse microculture within aspects of American society, less influenced by what's breaking in the news. Okay. So all this is really, really critical information. And by talking to people, we can get a good idea of those that are on the level. You can even say sensitive, intuitive, knowledgeable, skillful. When testing the waters to see who is open to the idea of preparedness for urban survival, be prepared to convert some people. You can find that even relatively intelligent people have been duped by their governments into thinking that disaster will never strike. Remind them that San Francisco is expecting the big one sometime soon. Remind them that New Zealand has a 30% chance of a devastating earthquake in the next 50 years. Remind them that every year entire towns are flooded unexpectedly. Remind them of Hurricane Katrina and how people waited for days and weeks for government help. Important point. We can also talk about Portland being overdue for a 9.0 earthquake. We see the government running their drills. We see how even talking about these things and elements of survival are sensitive to YouTube. Remember, when disaster strikes, everyone will become either an asset or a liability to you. You have what they want, they will try to take it from you by begging or even force. By building assets before disaster strikes, you can remain one step ahead of everyone. You can also work together to better defend yourselves. Okay, operational security. One of the most important things when preparing for urban survival is to tell as few people as possible about your plans. Where stuff's buried, things of that nature, meetup points. The fewer the better. The more people you tell about your plans, and in particular what you have stockpiled and the equipment you have, the more likely you are to face threats if and when disaster strikes. Let's face it, most people will not prepare for disaster. When it strikes, they will have absolutely nothing except the clothes on their back, and they know that you have food that will feed their families, and they will attack you if you don't willingly hand it over. You might even do the same in such a situation. And if you tell people to get prepared ahead of time, before the disaster, you can likely be called a conspiracy theorist fear-monger. The only people who should know even the most minor details about your own operation are those trusted confidants that you made when deciding to build a team. Make it clear that they are sworn to secrecy, and that you will likewise keep their own plans a secret. Reveal only as much information about your own operation as necessary. For example, if your friends on your street who you've known for years and have over all the time for dinner, and likewise, then you can reveal how many days worth of food you have so they too can't attempt to match it. On the other hand, if you know someone for a year and who you trust to keep a secret, but don't know them much better than that, then it makes sense to share that you are both making plans and can rely on each other in a jam, but not to give any precise details about your plans, about what you have. If you do trade information about plans, only do so if they are likewise trading a similar gravity of information. This way, your trust with each other is locked in and helps to reinforce the secret. Otherwise, it would come at little cost for someone to reveal to others your secret if their hand was forced or acting under duress. Clearly, you can trust your closest family. Depends. In fact, you should encourage them to make their own plans and help them out if necessary. Just make sure they're sworn to secrecy. It's very easy for a family member to casually tell someone you don't know that, quote, my brother's got a huge cellar full of 3 months worth of food in order to impress them, and your secret will be out. As cliche as it sounds, operational security is about need to know. Ideally, you should tell nobody about your plans, but if it does pay to tell a few people, to tell a few people if you get something in return. Partnership, friendship, associations. That said, limit this knowledge to whoever needs to know it, and only whatever information they need to know. And in the end, by the way, my preparation is just whatever the creator decides. And if it's time to go home, it's time to go home. So I have a totally different, but not suicide. But it's there are certain things that are just out of my control. And I've talked about this in other videos, just taking a brief break. I've had moments of divine intervention in my life that are at least 5 times that I'm aware of. Okay, I'm absolutely convinced. So if that's the case, why would that not be the case if I continue to do good work by trying to help people by providing information? My preparedness is there. A lot of preppers and people like to stay out of the limelight, stay out of controversial topics, tell people what they want to hear, and I cover the gamut. I cover a lot of different topics on this channel. Haven't done a video like this in a while. But is this critical? This is critical. There are various elements of survival and preparation. There's self-defense, there's psychological, there's spiritual, there's the physical, there's geographic. And so these are different elements that I'm bringing to you. Joel Skousen's Strategic Relocation. At some point, I'm going to review elements of that PDF. You're going to want to get on my newsletter at alexansary.tv to get that in your email. YouTube is doing a lot to make sure that we're reaching less of you. Same thing with Facebook and Twitter. I think there's good information from Joel Skousen. Check out my interview with him from 2009 where we talk about future wars with China and Russia. But you're getting his perspective from his own bias, wherever that stems from, with some of the areas that he's labeled good that wouldn't be good for some people. And some areas would be good that he may not have knowledge of. And he's also invested personally in setting up people's bunkers and survival retreats in certain areas. So, people may have certain reasons why they've developed manuals pointing to certain directions. There's also a lot of people talk about the Ozarks and certain areas out there back east, but I also see that being within a few hours of a lot of major cities as well, as safe as people think the Ozarks and some of those areas might be. There's still a pretty dense population over there on the East Coast. And if it's a major event, like the grid going down from a solar flare or something else, then you're going to have a massive flight out of the cities, whether the freeways are open or not. They'll be carrying what they can, what little they have, on their backs and in their hands. And so, look at these TV shows and Jesse Ventura and conspiracy, just about everybody knows about the Ozarks. So you have some areas that people are recommending, and they're always recommending those areas. Then if that's a high-profile area like the Ozarks and others, then is that really a good survival spot to get away from mobs of people? Or it's going to be a bunch of mobs of people ending up in the forest. Like I would talk about the analogy of Mount Hood when I lived in the Pacific Northwest. A lot of people say, I'm going to go up and get me a deer, without preparing for that ahead of time and going off grid ahead of time to learn those skills, without realizing all those deers are going to be gone. Hell, right now there's deer and elk that are missing here in this area because we got cougars and mountain cats all around me. They're right here in this area. I walk around at night. Okay, and then it talks about dependence. You've got to be concerned for the children and the elderly. Remember, in an urban survival situation, it's usually best to remain in place. You have nowhere to go. Main transport routes will be gridlocked. And though it can happen, it is unlikely that you'll be forced to move over a period of hours or days to a new location. This can sometimes happen in nuclear disasters, pandemics, wildfires, etc., etc. Homelessness epidemic from systemic economic issues that have not yet been addressed, etc. Ongoing now. People living in RVs now. People being kicked off their land because they don't have a septics now. People being forced from the grid back into the city now. Not being discussed. by the urban survivalist authors. So, have to bring in some of my experiences, what I've learned. Family rally point. If a disaster strikes in the middle of the night or on a lazy Sunday evening when many people are home, then that would be extremely useful in terms of logistics, but would also be incredibly unlikely. It is far more likely that your entire family will not be home, but will be at work or out and about. So what happens if disaster strikes? Do you and your family know what to do? The most important thing is that you can be united, so they can all take the next course of action together. People need to prepare for their cell phones to not work and already have a plan. You should drill your family and have what is known as a family rally point. In fact, the name is a bit of a misnomer. You should actually have several rally points. Backup plans. If I'm not here, you meet me here. Depending on the severity of the disaster. If the disaster is nearby but there's no threat to your home, then you should try to meet there. If your home is affected and you cannot get to your street, gas explosion, fire, etc., then you should arrange to meet somewhere several blocks away, a church or outside a store or at a friend's house. If the town is affected and you can't get home, radioactive fallout, biohazard, then you need a rally point somewhere much farther out. It could be a landmark in the next town. Make sure that your family is drilled on your family rally points. If they get confused about which one to head to, different disasters, different responses. Tell them to just remember all three and to head for the closest to home. In the event of a disaster, they will soon discover which rally points are impossible to reach and which are not. If you are at work or away from home when disaster strikes, you should attempt to call your relatives to confirm the rally point to meet at. However, you may not be able to get through as phone lines are jammed in the event of a disaster. Keep redialing until you can get a connection while you head to the nearest rally point to your home. You should also send text messages, as these are sometimes stand a higher chance of getting through than voice calls. Make sure that you and your family know how to get to your rally points from your main daytime locations such as work or school. For example, you may live far from work and have to pass through areas vulnerable to being blocked or closed in the event of a disaster such as a bridge crossing over a river. Know what your alternatives are. If your kids are far from home, then research the geographical area and drill them on what to do if disaster strikes. Ideally, you should carry an emergency kit at all times. If not, then keep one at work and one in the car. For kids, the above scenario, you should give them a cut down, ultra-light version. Learning to carry light is something that I had to learn over the years. Additionally, give them one to put in their locker at school, but do not rely solely on this as an emergency. May mean that they cannot gain access to it if their building is evacuated. Portable emergency kit. The next section on the basic kit that you need shows you how to create a 72-hour pack, often termed the bug-out bag, for you to keep in the car, another at the office, or one in the home. Or you can just, pay 3 times the amount of the stuff that's in the bug-out bag and buy it from somewhere on the internet. What if you have no car? While hunkering down, transport will probably not be at the top of your list of concerns. However, if you do have to bail out and flee as a last resort, then a car will get you away fast and provide some minimal protection against threats. If you have a family to take care of, then there is really no substitute. However, do not underestimate the utility of a motorcycle or even a regular bicycle. What I've been thinking about is a scooter, or maybe something that could be converted to haul water for those that are living up in hill country where there actually isn't a river running through here. There would have to be some way of getting water to survive where I live. So that's something that I've thought of. Closing out this section, then we're going to pause and come back in a new video and talk about the self-defense philosophy, dealing with mobs. I want to mention briefly a few things that he does recommend before we go further. Okay, other than the 72-hour kit, he mentions a airtight container All your preparation would go down the drain if you had to wade through waist-deep water, so dive bags, for example, or other containers. What you put in this portable emergency kit will be a matter of argument depending on which urban survivalist you speak to. However, all would agree that you should pack what is appropriate for your own situation. If you rely on daily medication, you should pack at least a few days' worth. If you rely on contact lenses or glasses, you might pack a second set of small fold-up glasses. If you live near a nuclear plant, you should pack some iodine tablets. Every situation is different, and you have to try to cover the most likely disasters, more likely disasters and threats and people in your area. That said, there's some common items that are going to be useful for you to have on hand in any situation. I strongly recommend that you pack all of these items in your portable emergency kit, and then add on any additional ones relevant to your own situation. Remember to try to find the smallest version you can for all of these items, because space is a great premium. Lighters, small penknife, glucose tablets, third strip ibuprofen tablets, $50 worth of bills, mixed bills, and high value coins, small flashlight, a signal mirror, safety pins, adhesive wound dressing. That isn't much, but that gives you the idea. These are the basic essentials that could be extremely useful if you are stranded without your regular 72-hour bag, which you can take with you everywhere. Imagine that an earthquake hits and the buildings collapse around you. With this kit on your person, you'll be far better prepared than anyone else in your building. And there's actually something that Matthew Stein, in the 3-hour interview that I did with him, he's the author of When Disaster Strikes, we got into preparation, not just the solar flare geopolitical threats to the grid and what would happen when the grid goes out and that type of a disaster. He talked about the need for, he talked about adhesive first aid supplies or bandages, but something to wrap around your foot for walking for long periods of time. Walking for long distances of time, getting blisters, and having pain in the foot for walking more miles than what the body and the feet are accustomed to dealing with. So, if someone's walking around barefoot, for example, in the desert, like Cody Lundeen, author of When All Hell Breaks Loose, his feet are hardened to a certain degree and developed the callousness. But a lot of us, don't have that ability. And so that's something to consider as well. So this is going to be a continuous series. You can consider this part 1. Subscribe if you're new. Also get on the newsletter at alexansary.tv, and we'll see you in the next video.